Did you ever find a document that made your entire world collapse in a single second? I'm talking about the kind of secret that doesn't just change your past, it rewrites your DNA, your identity, your very existence. Well, 3 months ago, I found that document, and what I discovered about my parents made me question everything I thought I knew about love, family, and the law. I'm sitting here today, 34 years old, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the people who raised me, my loving, devoted parents, are brother and sister, full biological siblings, and I am the product of that relationship. But here's what nobody tells you about discovering something like this. It's not just one revelation, it's a cascade. Because once I found out the truth about my parents, I uncovered a conspiracy that involved my grandparents, a fake birth certificate, a hidden inheritance worth over $8 million, and a family member who tried to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal everything. My name is Charlotte Webb. I'm a high school chemistry teacher from a small town you've probably never heard of, and what I'm about to tell you will forever change the way you think about family secrets. If you're watching this, I need you to do me a favor. Stick with me until the end, because the twist that happens in the final 10 minutes when I confronted my aunt in front of the entire family at what was supposed to be a celebration dinner, that moment will make everything worth it. I promise you, you've never heard a story like this. Let's start 3 months ago, March 15th, a Tuesday. It was raining that morning. Not the romantic kind of rain you see in movies, but the cold, relentless kind that seeps into your bones and makes you want to stay in bed forever. I was in my childhood home, the house where I grew up, because my mother, Patricia, had fallen and broken her hip 2 weeks earlier. She was 61 years old, and the doctor said she'd need at least 6 weeks of recovery. My father, Richard, was 63, and he was struggling to take care of her alone, so I took a leave of absence from my teaching job and moved back home temporarily. My husband, Marcus, stayed at our apartment in the city, about 2 hours away. He'd visit on weekends. That Tuesday morning, my mother asked me to find her insurance documents. She needed to file a claim for the hospital bills, and she couldn't remember where she'd put the folder. "Check the filing cabinet in the basement," she said from her bed, her voice weak but still carrying that familiar tone of authority. "Bottom drawer, I think. It's labeled medical." I nodded and headed downstairs. Now here's where I need you to understand something about my parents' basement. It wasn't some creepy, unfinished dungeon. It was actually quite nice. My father had renovated it years ago, turning it into a combination office and storage space. There were built-in shelves, a desk, and yes, a large filing cabinet against the far wall. I opened the bottom drawer and immediately saw the folder labeled medical, but as I pulled it out, another folder fell from behind it, landing on the floor with a soft thud. This folder was unmarked, just a plain manila folder, slightly yellowed with age. I should have just picked it up and put it back. I should have minded my own business, but something about the way it had been hidden, tucked behind the other folders, almost deliberately concealed, made me curious. I opened it. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a birth certificate, my birth certificate, except it wasn't the one I'd seen before. This one had different information. On the birth certificate I'd always known, my parents were listed as Patricia Ann Morrison and Richard James Webb. But this certificate, this original certificate, listed my mother as Patricia Ann Morrison and my father as Richard James Morrison. Morrison, the same last name as my mother. My hand started shaking. I read it again, thinking I'd misunderstood. But no, there it was in black and white, Richard James Morrison and Patricia Ann Morrison. The second document was a marriage certificate dated 1988, 1 year before I was born. It showed Patricia Ann Morrison marrying Richard James Morrison in a small ceremony in Nevada. But that made no sense. My parents had always told me they got married in 1987 in our hometown church. I'd seen the wedding photos, I'd heard the stories. The third document made my blood run cold. It was a legal name change certificate dated 1989, 2 months after I was born. Richard James Morrison had legally changed his name to Richard James Webb. I sat down on the floor, the folder trembling in my hands. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what this meant. Morrison. They both had the same last name before they got married. That could be a coincidence, right? Lots of people have the same last name without being related. But why would my father change his name right after I was born? Why would they hide the original birth certificate? Why had I never known any of this? I pulled out my phone and did something I probably shouldn't have done. I opened a genealogy website I'd used once for a school project and entered my parents' names. What I found made me drop my phone. According to the public records, Patricia Ann Morrison and Richard James Morrison were listed as siblings, children of Robert Morrison and Helen Morrison, born 2 years apart. My parents were brother and sister. I sat there on that basement floor for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. My entire body felt numb. I couldn't breathe properly. I kept reading the documents over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood, hoping there was some other explanation. But there wasn't. My parents, the people who had raised me, loved me, taught me right from wrong, were biological siblings, and I was the product of an incestuous relationship. I heard my mother calling from upstairs. "Charlotte, did you find it?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't move. I just sat there staring at the documents, feeling like my entire identity had been erased in a single moment. "Charlotte!" Her voice was more insistent now, tinged with worry. I forced myself to stand up. I put the medical folder back in the drawer, but I kept the unmarked folder. I needed to think. I needed to process this. I needed to figure out what to do. I walked back upstairs, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. My mother looked at me with concern. "Are you okay, sweetheart? You look pale." I managed to nod. "I'm fine, just felt a little dizzy for a moment. Here's the medical folder." She took it from me, still looking worried. "Maybe you should sit down. Have you eaten today?" "I'm okay, Mom. I just need some air." I walked out of the room before she could say anything else. I went to my childhood bedroom, the room I'd slept in for 18 years before going to college, and closed the door. I sat on the bed and opened the folder again, hoping somehow the documents would say something different. But they didn't. The truth was right there, undeniable and horrifying. My parents were siblings. I was the product of incest. Everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. But here's what I didn't know yet, and this is where the story gets even darker. That discovery in the basement was just the beginning, because my parents weren't just siblings who fell in love. They were part of a much larger conspiracy involving money, manipulation, and a family member who would stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. And that family member was about to make a move that would force me to fight for everything. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what I'd discovered. Part of me wanted to march into my parents' room and demand answers. But another part of me, the part that was terrified of what those answers might be, kept me frozen. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed more information before I confronted them. I needed to understand the full picture. So I did what any rational person would do in 2024. I started researching. I spent the entire day in my room, telling my parents I wasn't feeling well. My mother, still recovering from her hip surgery, couldn't come check on me, and my father was too busy taking care of her to question my sudden illness. I started with the genealogy website, digging deeper into my family history. What I found was complicated. My grandparents, Robert and Helen Morrison, had 4 children: Patricia, my mother, Richard, my father, Susan, and Michael. According to the records, all 4 children were born between 1961 and 1967. Patricia was the oldest, born in 1963. Richard was born in 1965, Susan was born in 1966, and Michael was born in 1967. I'd known about Susan. She was my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, who lived about an hour away. We saw her occasionally at family gatherings, though she and my mother had never been particularly close. But Michael? I'd never heard of any Uncle Michael. I searched for Michael Morrison in the public records. What I found made my stomach turn. Michael Morrison had died in 1989, the same year I was born. He was 22 years old. The cause of death was listed as accidental drowning. But here's what made it suspicious. He died in March 1989. I was born in April 1989, and my father changed his name in June 1989. The timeline was too convenient to be coincidental. I kept digging. I found Michael's obituary in the local newspaper archives. It was brief, just a few lines. Michael James Morrison, 22, died tragically on March 15, 1989. He is survived by his parents, Robert and Helen Morrison, and his siblings, Patricia, Richard, and Susan. Services will be private. March 15, 1989, exactly 35 years to the day, the same date I'd found those documents in the basement. I felt like I was losing my mind. Nothing made sense. Why had no one ever mentioned Uncle Michael? Why had he died so close to my birth? And what did his death have to do with my father changing his name? I needed to talk to someone who might have answers, someone outside my immediate family. I called Aunt Susan. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. Hello? Aunt Susan, it's Charlotte. Charlotte, how are you, sweetheart? How's your mother doing? She's recovering. Listen, I need to ask you something. It's about the family. There was a pause. What about the family? I took a deep breath. Did you have a brother named Michael? The silence that followed was deafening. It lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. Aunt Susan? Where did you hear that name? Her voice had changed completely. It was cold, guarded. I found some documents, old records. I need to know the truth. Another long pause. Then, Charlotte, some things are better left in the past. Your parents love you very much. That's all that matters. But I have to go. Take care of your mother. She hung up. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. Her reaction had confirmed it. There was something about Michael, something the family had been hiding for 35 years. I spent the rest of the day searching for more information about Michael Morrison. I found a few old social media profiles, some high school yearbook photos, but nothing that explained how he died or why his death was connected to my birth. Then, around 8 p.m., I found something that changed everything. I was scrolling through old newspaper archives when I came across an article from April 1989. It was a small piece buried in the local news section. Local family receives substantial inheritance. The article read, "The Morrison family of town name has received a substantial inheritance following the death of patriarch Robert Morrison Sr., who passed away in February at the age of 89. The estate, valued at approximately $8 million, has been divided among his surviving grandchildren according to his will. The family declined to comment." I read it 3 times, my mind racing. Robert Morrison Sr., that would have been my great-grandfather. I'd never met him, he died before I was born, but according to this article, he'd left $8 million to his grandchildren. His grandchildren, that would include my mother, my father, Susan, and Michael. But Michael died in March 1989. The article was April 1989, which means Michael died right before the inheritance was distributed. I did some quick math. If the $8 million was divided among 4 grandchildren, each would get $2 million. But if one of them died before the distribution, the money would be split 3 ways instead, about $2.6 million each. Unless Michael had a child, in which case his share would go to his child. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the inheritance laws for our state. I read through the legal jargon trying to understand how it worked. According to the law, if a beneficiary died before receiving their inheritance, their share would typically go to their children. If they had no children, it would be divided among the surviving beneficiaries. But what if Michael did have a child? What if that child was me? No, that was impossible. The birth certificate said my parents were Richard and Patricia, not Michael and Patricia. Except the birth certificate had been altered. My father changed his name, and Michael died right before I was born. I felt like I was going to be sick. What if Richard wasn't my father at all? What if Michael was my father? What if my mother had been in a relationship with Michael, not Richard? What if the whole Richard is my father story was a lie to cover up something even worse? But that didn't make sense either. Richard and Patricia were also siblings. Either way, it was incest. I was missing something, some crucial piece of information that would make all of this make sense. I needed to talk to my parents. I needed answers, but I was terrified of what those answers might be. I decided to wait one more day. I'd do more research, gather more evidence, and then I'd confront them with everything I'd found. But I never got the chance, because the next morning, everything fell apart. I woke up to the sound of voices downstairs, loud voices, arguing. I looked at my phone. It was 7:30 a.m. I'd barely slept, maybe 3 hours total, and my head felt like it was full of cotton. I got out of bed and opened my door slightly, trying to hear what was going on. Absolutely ridiculous, Patricia. You can't keep hiding this forever. That was Aunt Susan's voice. We're not hiding anything. We're protecting our daughter. My mother's voice, defensive and sharp. Protecting her? You're lying to her. She has a right to know. She doesn't need to know. It would only hurt her. It's going to hurt her a lot more when she finds out on her own, and she will find out. These things always come out. My father's voice joined in, calmer but firm. Susan, we appreciate your concern, but this is our decision to make. Charlotte is our daughter, and we'll tell her when we think she's ready. She's 34 years old, Richard. When exactly will she be ready? When you're both dead and she finds out from a lawyer? There was a pause. Then my mother said, quietly, "Why are you really here, Susan?" Another pause. Then, "I got a call yesterday from Charlotte. She was asking about Michael." My heart stopped. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. "What did you tell her?" My father's voice was tense now. "I told her to leave it alone. But Richard, Patricia, she knows something. She's asking questions. You need to tell her the truth before she digs any deeper." "We can't." My mother's voice was barely a whisper. "If she finds out, she'll hate us. She'll never forgive us." "She'll hate you more if she finds out you've been lying to her for 34 years. "Susan, please." My father sounded exhausted. "Just give us some time. We'll figure out how to tell her." "You've had 34 years. How much more time do you need?" I couldn't listen anymore. I stepped back from the door, my mind reeling. They knew. They knew I was asking questions, and they were planning to tell me something. But what? What was the truth they were so afraid of? I got dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a sweater. I needed to get out of the house. I needed space to think. I grabbed my phone and the folder with the documents, stuffed them in my bag, and quietly made my way downstairs. The voices were coming from the kitchen, so I slipped out the front door without being seen. I got in my car and just drove. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to move, to do something other than sit in that house with all its secrets. I ended up at a coffee shop about 20 minutes away, in the next town over. I ordered a large coffee and sat in the corner, pulling out the documents again. I stared at them, trying to see something I'd missed, some clue that would explain everything. Then my phone rang. It was my husband, Marcus. "Hey,
I answered, trying to sound normal. Hey, babe, how's everything going? How's your mom? I almost broke down right there. Marcus was the one person in my life who had nothing to do with this mess, the one person I could trust completely. But how could I tell him what I discovered? How could I explain that my entire identity was a lie? She's doing okay, recovering. You sound tired. Are you getting enough sleep? Not really. It's been stressful. I can come down tonight if you want. I know I said I'd wait until the weekend, but if you need me... No, it's okay. I'm fine, really. There was a pause. Marcus knew me too well. Charlotte, what's wrong? And don't say nothing, because I can hear it in your voice. I closed my eyes. I found something about my family, about my parents, and I don't know what to do with it. What did you find? I took a deep breath. Can you come down tonight? I need to talk to you in person. Of course. I'll leave work early. I can be there by 6. Thank you. Charlotte, whatever it is, we'll figure it out together, okay? Okay. We hung up, and I felt marginally better. At least I'd have Marcus to talk to. At least I wouldn't be alone in this. I spent the next few hours in that coffee shop researching everything I could find about inheritance law, name changes, and birth certificate alterations. I learned that in our state, it was actually easy to change a birth certificate if both parents agreed and filed the proper paperwork, which meant my parents deliberately changed my birth certificate to hide something. But what? Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Where are you? We need to talk. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to face them yet. Another text came through 5 minutes later. Charlotte, please come home. It's important. Then another. Your father and I need to explain some things to you. I turned off my phone. I stayed at the coffee shop until 5 p.m., then drove to a park nearby to wait for Marcus. I didn't want to go back to my parents' house yet. I needed to talk to him first, to have someone on my side before I faced whatever truth my parents were about to tell me. Marcus arrived at 6:15 p.m. I saw his car pull into the parking lot, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. He got out and walked over to where I was sitting on a bench, his face full of concern. Hey, he said softly, sitting next to me. Talk to me. I handed him the folder. Read these. He opened it and looked at the documents, his brow frowning in confusion. What am I looking at? My birth certificate, the original one, and my father's name change certificate. He read them more carefully, and I watched as understanding slowly dawned on his face. Wait, your parents, they have the same last name, Morrison. They're siblings. Yes. He looked at me, his eyes wide. Charlotte, are you saying my parents are brother and sister? I'm the product of an incestuous relationship. He stared at me for a long moment, then looked back at the documents. But how? Why? I don't understand. Neither do I, but there's more. I told him everything I'd discovered, Michael's death, the inheritance, the timeline, Aunt Susan's reaction, the conversation I'd overheard that morning. By the time I finished, Marcus looked as overwhelmed as I felt. Okay, he said slowly. Okay, so what do you want to do? I don't know. I need to confront them. I need to hear the truth from them, but I'm terrified of what they're going to say. He took my hand. Whatever they say, whatever the truth is, it doesn't change who you are. You're still Charlotte. You're still the woman I love. This doesn't define you. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. But what if it does? What if there's something wrong with me because of how I was conceived? There's nothing wrong with you. You're perfect. Marcus, I'm the product of incest. That's not normal. That's not. You're not responsible for your parents' choices. Whatever they did, whatever mistakes they made, that's on them, not you. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything about me was tainted now, corrupted by the circumstances of my birth. I need to talk to them, I said finally. I need to hear the truth from them. Do you want me to come with you? I nodded. Please. We drove back to my parents' house together, Marcus following in his car. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the familiar streets of my childhood. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. It was like I was seeing my entire life through a different lens now, one that revealed all the cracks and lies beneath the surface. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw Aunt Susan's car was still there. Good. Maybe she could provide some answers too. Marcus and I walked to the front door together. I didn't bother knocking. It was still technically my parents' house, and I'd been staying there for 2 weeks. I just walked in. My parents and Aunt Susan were in the living room. They all looked up when we entered, and I saw the guilt written plainly on their faces. "Charlotte, sweetheart, where have you been? We've been so worried." I know the truth. About you and Dad, about Michael, about everything. The room went silent. My father's face went pale. Aunt Susan closed her eyes. And my mother started to cry. "Charlotte, please let us explain to," my father began. "Explain what? That you're siblings? That you've been lying to me my whole life? That my whole existence is based on a lie?" "It's not like that," my mother said through her tears. "Please, just sit down and let us tell you everything." I didn't want to sit down. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But Marcus gently guided me to a chair, and I sat, my whole body trembling. I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, and I felt like I was going to pass out. Marcus put his hand on my shoulder, steadying me. "Murdered?" I managed to say. Who killed him?" My mother looked at my father. My father looked at Aunt Susan, and Aunt Susan looked at me. "We don't know for certain," Aunt Susan said carefully, "but we have suspicions." "What kind of suspicions?" My father stood up and walked to the window, his back to us. "Michael's death happened 3 weeks before our grandfather's will was read, 3 weeks before we found out about the $8 million inheritance. You think someone killed him for the money? We think it's possible. But who? Who would—" I stopped, a horrible realization dawning on me. The money. If Michael died before the will was read, his share would go to his child, to me. "Yes," my mother said quietly, "but I was just a baby. I couldn't inherit money as a baby." "No," my father said, turning back to face me, "but your legal guardian could manage it for you until you turned 18, and your legal guardian was—" "You," I whispered, "you and Mom." "We never touched that money," my mother said quickly. "We put it all in a trust for you, every penny. It's been sitting there for 34 years, growing with interest. It's yours, Charlotte. It's always been yours." My mind was reeling. How much? With interest? About $6.2 million. I stared at her. $6 million? I had $6 million that I'd never known about. "But if you never touched it, then why did you change my birth certificate? Why did you pretend Richard was my father instead of Michael?" "Because," Aunt Susan said carefully, "if anyone found out that Michael was your father, they might start asking questions about his death. And if they started investigating, they might discover that it wasn't an accident." "And you think what? That someone in the family killed him?" No one answered. The silence was deafening. "Who?" I demanded. "Who do you think killed Michael?" My father sat back down, looking exhausted. "Charlotte, we don't have proof. We never had proof. That's why we never went to the police. But there was someone who had a lot to gain from Michael's death." "Who?" "Your grandmother, Helen Morrison." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Grandma Helen? But she died when I was 10. She was always so sweet to me. She was also deeply indebted. She and your grandfather, our father, Robert, they had a terrible marriage. He was abusive, controlling. He controlled all the money. When he died in 1988, she thought she'd finally be free, but his will left everything to her grandchildren, not to her. She got nothing. "But if Michael died," I said slowly, understanding dawning, "and his share went to me, and I was a baby, then my legal guardians would control the money. And if something happened to my legal guardians, it would go to the next of kin, which would have been Helen as the grandmother. But nothing happened to you. You're both still alive." "Because we were careful," my mother said, crying again. "After Michael died, we knew something was wrong. We suspected Helen, but we couldn't prove it, so we took precautions. We changed your birth certificate to hide the connection to Michael. Richard changed his last name to Webb, so it wouldn't be obvious we were siblings. We moved to a different town. We kept a low profile. And we never told Helen about the trust fund," my father added. "As far as she knew, Michael's share of the inheritance was divided among the 3 surviving grandchildren, Patricia, me, and Susan. She never knew you were entitled to Michael's share." "But she must have suspected something." She kept asking questions, kept trying to get close to you, Charlotte. "Do you remember how she always wanted you to come stay with her? How she'd offer to babysit, to take you on trips?" I did remember. Grandma Helen had always been very attentive to me, more so than to my cousins. I thought it was because I was special to her. But now, you think she was trying to, what, get access to me so she could get to the money? "We think she was trying to figure out if you were Michael's daughter, and if you were, she might have tried to hurt you, to make sure the money eventually came to her." I felt sick. "But she died when I was 10, so the threat is gone, right?" My parents exchanged another look, that look that said there was more to the story. "What?" I demanded. "What aren't you telling me?" "Helen didn't die of natural causes," Aunt Susan said quietly. "She died of a heart attack, yes, but the autopsy showed unusually high levels of potassium in her system, potassium chloride specifically. It's a substance that can cause cardiac arrest if injected in high doses." "Are you saying someone killed her?" "We're saying it's suspicious, but again, there was no proof. The medical examiner ruled it a natural death. Case closed." "Who would have killed her?" No one answered, but I saw the way my parents looked at each other, and I understood. "You think Dad did it," I said, looking at my father. "You think he killed his own mother to protect me." "I didn't," my father said firmly. "Charlotte, I swear to you I didn't kill her. I wanted to. God knows I thought about it, but I didn't." "Then who did?" "We don't know," my mother said. "Maybe it really was natural causes. Maybe the potassium levels were just a coincidence. We'll never know for sure." I sat there, trying to process everything I just learned. My biological father was murdered. My grandmother might have been the killer. My grandmother might have been murdered in retaliation. And I had $6 million sitting in a trust fund that I'd never known about. But if you never touched it, then why did you change my birth certificate? Why did you pretend Richard was my father instead of Michael? Because, Aunt Susan said carefully, if anyone found out that Michael was your father, they might start asking questions about his death, and if they started investigating, they might discover that it wasn't an accident. And you think what? That someone in the family killed him? No one answered. The silence was deafening. Who? I demanded. Who do you think killed Michael? My father sat back down, looking exhausted. Charlotte, we don't have proof. We never had proof. That's why we never went to the police. But there was someone who had a lot to gain from Michael's death. Who? Your grandmother, Helen Morrison. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Grandma Helen? But she died when I was 10. She was always so sweet to me. She was also deeply indebted. She and your grandfather, our father, Robert, they had a terrible marriage. He was abusive, controlling. He controlled all the money. When he died in 1988, she thought she'd finally be free, but his will left everything to her grandchildren, not to her. She got nothing. But if Michael died, I said slowly, understanding dawning, and his share went to me, and I was a baby, then my legal guardians would control the money, and if something happened to my legal guardians, it would go to the next of kin, which would have been Helen as the grandmother. But nothing happened to you. You're both still alive. Because we were careful, my mother said, crying again. After Michael died, we knew something was wrong. We suspected Helen, but we couldn't prove it, so we took precautions. We changed your birth certificate to hide the connection to Michael. Richard changed his last name to Webb, so it wouldn't be obvious we were siblings. We moved to a different town. We kept a low profile. And we never told Helen about the trust fund, my father added. As far as she knew, Michael's share of the inheritance was divided among the 3 surviving grandchildren, Patricia, me, and Susan. She never knew you were entitled to Michael's share. But she must have suspected something. She kept asking questions, kept trying to get close to you, Charlotte. Do you remember how she always wanted you to come stay with her? How she'd offer to babysit, to take you on trips? I did remember. Grandma Helen had always been very attentive to me, more so than to my cousins. I thought it was because I was special to her. But now, you think she was trying to, what, get access to me so she could get to the money? We think she was trying to figure out if you were Michael's daughter, and if you were, she might have tried to hurt you, to make sure the money eventually came to her. I felt sick, but she died when I was 10, so the threat is gone, right? My parents exchanged another.
The next morning, I called in sick to work. I told my principal I needed another week of personal leave, and thankfully she didn't ask too many questions. Then I sat down at my laptop and started researching. First, I needed to find out everything I could about Michael Morrison's death. I started with the newspaper archives, looking for articles from March 1989. I found the original report of his death. Local man drowns in lake incident. Michael James Morrison, 22, of town name, died yesterday in what authorities are calling an accidental drowning. Morrison's body was found in Lake Clearwater by a fisherman early Sunday morning. According to police reports, Morrison had been at a party near the lake on Saturday night and may have gone for a swim alone. Alcohol is believed to be a factor. The investigation is ongoing, but foul play is not suspected at this time. That was it. Just a few paragraphs. No follow-up articles, no further investigation mentioned. Case closed. But something about it bothered me. Michael had been at a party. There must have been witnesses, people who saw him that night, people who might remember something.
I searched for more information about the party but found nothing in the newspapers, so I tried a different approach. I went to social media and started searching for people who would have been Michael's age in 1989, people who might have known him, who might have been at that party. It took me 3 hours of scrolling through profiles, but I finally found someone. David Chen, who had gone to high school with Michael. His profile said he still lived in my hometown, and he'd posted several throwback photos over the years, including one from 1989 that showed him and Michael at what looked like a graduation party. I sent him a message. "Hi, David. My name is Charlotte Webb. I'm Michael Morrison's daughter. I know this is out of the blue, but I'm trying to learn more about my father. He died before I was born, and my family doesn't talk about him much. I saw you were friends with him. Would you be willing to talk to me about him?" I hit send and waited, not really expecting a response, but 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Holy shit! Michael had a daughter? I had no idea. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you. When works for you? We arranged to meet that afternoon at a coffee shop in my hometown. Marcus offered to come with me, but I told him I needed to do this alone. I drove the 2 hours back to my hometown, my stomach in knots the entire way. I kept thinking about what David might tell me. Would he confirm my family's suspicions? Would he have information that could prove Helen killed Michael? David was already at the coffee shop when I arrived. He was a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. He stood up when he saw me approach. "Charlotte?" "Yes. Thank you so much for meeting me." We sat down and he studied my face for a moment. "Wow, you look like him. Same eyes, same smile." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Really?" "Yeah, it's uncanny." He shook his head. "I still can't believe Michael had a daughter. He never mentioned it. But then again, he died so young. Maybe he didn't know?" "He knew," I said. "My mother was pregnant when he died. They were together." "Patricia? Patricia Morrison?" I nodded. His eyes widened. "Oh man, that makes sense now. There were rumors, about them. People talked." "What kind of rumors?" He looked uncomfortable. "Look, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but people said their relationship was inappropriate, that they were too close. Some people even said they were—" He trailed off. "Siblings?" I finished for him. "Yeah, but I never believed it. I mean, they had the same last name, but I figured it was just a coincidence. Lots of people have the same last name." "They were siblings," I said quietly. "It's true." He sat back in his chair, processing this. "Damn, I'm sorry. That must be complicated." "That's one word for it." I took a sip of my coffee, gathering my courage. "David, I need to ask you about the night Michael died. Were you at that party?" His expression changed, becoming more guarded. "Why do you want to know about that?" "Because I don't think his death was an accident. I think someone killed him." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. "I've thought the same thing for 35 years. My heart started racing. "What do you mean?" "I was at that party. I was one of the last people to see Michael alive, and I'm telling you, something wasn't right about that night." "Tell me everything." "Okay, so it was a Saturday night in March. A bunch of us from high school were having a party at Jake Sullivan's cabin near Lake Clearwater. Michael showed up around 8 p.m. with Patricia. They seemed happy, excited even. Patricia was showing off her engagement ring. They'd just gotten engaged the week before." "Wait, they were engaged?" "Yeah, Michael was over the moon about it. He kept talking about how they were going to get married in the summer, how they were going to move away and start fresh somewhere new." This was news to me. My mother had never mentioned being engaged to Michael. "What happened next?" "Around 10 p.m., Michael's mother showed up." I felt my blood run cold. "Helen? She came to the party?" "Yeah, she wasn't invited, but she showed up anyway. She said she needed to talk to Michael privately. He didn't want to go with her, I could tell. He was annoyed, but she was insistent, so he went outside with her. Did you hear what they talked about? No, but I saw them through the window. They were arguing. Helen was gesturing wildly, and Michael looked angry. At one point, he turned to walk away, and she grabbed his arm. He shook her off and came back inside. What did he say? He told Patricia they needed to leave. He looked really upset. Patricia asked what was wrong, but he said he'd explain in the car. They left around 10:30. And that was the last time you saw him? Alive, yes. But here's the thing. The next morning when they found his body, he was alone. No sign of Patricia, and his car was still at the cabin. So how did he get back to the lake if he left with Patricia? I felt a chill run down my spine. What are you saying? I'm saying the official story doesn't make sense. The police said he came back to the lake alone later that night and went for a drunken swim, but his car was still at the cabin. And Michael wasn't that drunk when he left. I'd been drinking with him all night. He'd had maybe 3 beers over the course of 2 hours. He was fine. Did you tell the police this? I tried. I gave a statement, but they didn't seem interested. They'd already decided it was an accidental drowning, case closed. Did anyone else see what happened? Was anyone else there when they found the body? The fisherman who found him was a guy named Tom Bradley. He's still around, actually, lives over on Maple Street. I made a mental note of the name. What about Patricia? Did you talk to her after Michael died? I tried. I went to the funeral, but she wasn't there. Her family said she was too distraught to attend. And then, a few months later, I heard she'd married Richard Morrison, Michael's brother. It seemed fast, suspicious even. Did you ever suspect Richard might have been involved in Michael's death? David hesitated. I don't want to accuse anyone without proof, but yeah, the thought crossed my mind. Richard and Michael never got along. There was always tension between them. And then Michael dies, and suddenly Richard is married to Patricia and raising Michael's kid as his own? It's weird. I sat back, my mind racing. Everything David was telling me contradicted the story my parents had told me. They'd said Michael drowned accidentally. They'd said Helen might have killed him. But David's account suggested something else entirely. David, do you think Patricia might have been involved? He looked at me with sympathy. I don't know, Charlotte. I really don't. But I think there's more to the story than what we were told. We talked for another hour. David gave me the names of other people who'd been at the party that night, people who might remember something useful. He also gave me Tom Bradley's address. When I left the coffee shop, I sat in my car for a long time, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to drive straight to my parents' house and demand the truth, but another part of me knew I needed more information first. I decided to talk to Tom Bradley, the fisherman who found Michael's body.
Tom Bradley lived in a small house on Maple Street, just a few blocks from the lake where Michael had died. It was a modest place with a well-maintained garden and a fishing boat parked in the driveway. I knocked on the door, not sure what I was going to say. How do you ask someone about a body they found 35 years ago? An older man answered, probably in his early 70s, with weathered skin and sharp blue eyes. Can I help you? Mr. Bradley, my name is Charlotte Webb. I'm Michael Morrison's daughter. His expression changed immediately, recognition followed by something that looked like guilt. You'd better come in, he said quietly. He led me to a small living room and gestured for me to sit. He sat across from me, his hands clasped together. I wondered if anyone would ever come asking about that night, he said. I've been carrying it with me for 35 years. Carrying what? He took a deep breath. The truth about what I saw. My heart was pounding. Tell me. I didn't find Michael's body by accident, he began. I was out on the lake that morning because I couldn't sleep. I'd been having nightmares about what I'd seen the night before. What did you see? I was out fishing late Saturday night. I do that sometimes when I can't sleep. Around midnight, I saw a car pull up to the boat launch. Two people got out, a man and a woman. They were arguing. Could you see who they were? Not clearly. It was dark and I was about 50 yards away, but I could hear them. The woman was crying, saying something about, "We have no choice," and "It's the only way." The man was angry, shouting. Then I heard a splash. I felt like I couldn't breathe. A splash? Yeah, like something or someone had gone into the water. I started rowing closer, but the woman saw me. She shouted something to the man, and they both got back in the car and drove off fast. What did you do? I rowed to where I'd heard the splash. I had a flashlight and I shined it on the water. I saw something floating. At first, I thought it was just debris, but then I got closer and realized it was a person, a man face down in the water. Michael. He nodded. I pulled him to shore and tried to do CPR, but he was already gone. He'd been in the water too long, so I called the police. Did you tell them what you saw? About the two people arguing? I tried, but when the police arrived, they seemed more interested in closing the case quickly than investigating. They said it was clearly an accidental drowning. Young man, been drinking, went for a swim, tragic accident. When I insisted I'd seen two people, they said I must have been mistaken, that it was dark, that I was far away, that I probably saw Michael with a friend who left before he went swimming. But you know that's not what happened. I know what I saw. Someone pushed that man into the water, and then they left him there to die. Could you identify the two people, if you saw them again? He shook his head. It was too dark. All I can tell you is that one was a man, probably tall, and one was a woman with long hair. That's it. Did you see what kind of car they were driving? It was a sedan, dark-colored, maybe blue or black, but I didn't get the license plate. I sat there processing this information. Tom's story confirmed that Michael's death wasn't an accident. Someone had killed him. But who? Mr. Bradley, why didn't you push harder? Why didn't you go to the newspapers or demand a proper investigation? He looked down at his hands. Because 2 days after I found the body, I got a visit. A woman came to my house. She said she was Michael's mother. She thanked me for finding her son, and then she handed me an envelope. What was in it? $10,000 in cash. She said it was a thank you for my help, for being there when her son needed someone. But the way she said it, it felt like a payment, like she was paying me to keep quiet. Helen, I whispered. It was Helen Morrison. I didn't know her name at the time, but yes, if that was Michael's mother, then yes. Did you keep the money? He nodded, shame evident on his face. I did. I'm not proud of it. I was going through a divorce. I was broke, and $10,000 was a lot of money back then. So I took it, and I kept my mouth shut, and I've regretted it every day since. Mr. Bradley, I need you to tell this story to someone official, to a lawyer or a private investigator or— I'll do it, he said firmly. I'm an old man now. I don't have much time left, and I don't want to die with this on my conscience. If you're trying to find out what really happened to your father, I'll help however I can. I felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you so much. He gave me his phone number and email address, and I promised to be in touch soon with next steps. As I drove away from his house, my mind was spinning. Tom's story confirmed that Michael's death wasn't an accident. Someone had killed him. But who? Mr. Bradley, why didn't you push harder? Why didn't you go to the newspapers or demand a proper investigation? He looked down at his hands. Because 2 days after I found the body, I got a visit. A woman came to my house. She said she was Michael's mother. She thanked me for finding her son, and then she handed me an envelope. What was in it? $10,000 in cash. She said it was a thank you for my help, for being there when her son needed someone. But the way she said it,
it felt like a payment, like she was paying me to keep quiet. Helen, I whispered. It was Helen Morrison. I didn't know her name at the time, but yes, if that was Michael's mother, then yes. Did you keep the money? He nodded, shame evident on his face. I did. I'm not proud of it. I was going through a divorce, I was broke, and $10,000 was a lot of money back then. So I took it and I kept my mouth shut, and I've regretted it every day since. Mr. Bradley, I need you to tell this story to someone official, to a lawyer or a private investigator or— I'll do it, he said firmly. I'm an old man now. I don't have much time left, and I don't want to die with this on my conscience. If you're trying to find out what really happened to your father, I'll help however I can. I felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you so much. He gave me his phone number and email address, and I promised to be in touch soon with next steps. As I drove away from his house, my mind was spinning. Tom's story confirmed that Michael's death wasn't an accident. Someone had killed him. But who? Mr. Bradley, why didn't you push harder? Why didn't you go to the newspapers or demand a proper investigation? He looked down at his hands. Because 2 days after I found the body, I got a visit. A woman came to my house. She said she was Michael's mother. She thanked me for finding her son, and then she handed me an envelope. What was in it? $10,000 in cash. She said it was a thank you for my help, for being there when her son needed someone. But the way she said it, it felt like a payment, like she was paying me to keep quiet. Helen, I whispered. It was Helen Morrison. I didn't know her name at the time, but yes, if that was Michael's mother, then yes. Did you keep the money? He nodded, shame evident on his face. I did. I'm not proud of it. I was going through a divorce, I was broke, and $10,000 was a lot of money back then. So I took it and I kept my mouth shut, and I've regretted it every day since. Mr. Bradley, I need you to tell this story to someone official, to a lawyer or a private investigator or— I'll do it, he said firmly. I'm an old man now. I don't have much time left, and I don't want to die with this on my conscience. If you're trying to find out what really happened to your father, I'll help however I can. I felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you so much. He gave me his phone number and email address, and I promised to be in touch soon with next steps. As I drove away from his house, my mind was spinning. Tom's story confirmed that Michael's death wasn't an accident. Someone had killed him. But who? Mr. Bradley, why didn't you push harder? Why didn't you go to the newspapers or demand a proper investigation? He looked down at his hands. Because 2 days after I found the body, I got a visit. A woman came to my house. She said she was Michael's mother. She thanked me for finding her son, and then she handed me an envelope. What was in it? $10,000 in cash. She said it was a thank you for my help, for being there when her son needed someone. But the way she said it, it felt like a payment, like she was paying me to keep quiet. Helen, I whispered. It was Helen Morrison. I didn't know her name at the time, but yes, if that was Michael's mother, then yes. Did you keep the money? He nodded, shame evident on his face. I did. I'm not proud of it. I was going through a divorce, I was broke, and $10,000 was a lot of money back then. So I took it and I kept my mouth shut, and I've regretted it every day since. Mr. Bradley, I need you to tell this story to someone. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. What? I was there that night, Susan said, her voice shaking. I saw what happened. Tell me everything, from the beginning. She sat down on a bench near the graves, and I sat beside her. She stared at her hands as she spoke. Michael and Patricia were in love. Real love, not the twisted thing she had with Richard. When she found out she was pregnant, Michael was thrilled. He wanted to marry her, to move away and start a new life together somewhere no one knew them. But Richard was obsessed with Patricia. He always had been, even when they were kids. He couldn't stand the idea of her being with Michael, and when he found out about the pregnancy, he lost it. What did he do? He went to Patricia and told her she had to choose, him or Michael. He said if she chose Michael, he would expose their relationship, hers and Richard's. He'd tell everyone that they'd been sleeping together for years, that they were siblings, that their relationship was illegal and immoral. Wait, Patricia and Richard were together before she was with Michael? Susan nodded. They'd been in a relationship since they were teenagers. It was a secret, obviously, but it was serious. Richard thought they'd be together forever. When Patricia fell for Michael, Richard felt betrayed. So Patricia chose Richard? Not at first. She told Richard she loved Michael, that she was going to marry him. Richard was devastated. But then he came up with a plan. What kind of plan? He told Patricia that if Michael died, his share of the inheritance would go to the baby, to you. And since Patricia would be your mother and Richard would be your stepfather, they could control that money. They could use it to start a new life together far away from here. I felt sick. And Patricia agreed to this? Not immediately, but Richard was persuasive. He told her that Michael would never let her go, that he'd fight for custody of the baby, that their lives would be ruined if the truth about her and Richard came out. He painted a picture where killing Michael was the only solution. And she believed him? She was young and scared and in love with Richard, so yes, eventually she agreed. Tell me what happened that night at the lake. Susan took a shaky breath. Patricia and Michael left the party together, like you probably already know, but they didn't go home. Patricia told Michael she wanted to talk by the lake, somewhere private. Michael agreed. When they got there, Richard was waiting. Richard was there? He'd been hiding near the boat launch. When Patricia and Michael arrived, Patricia started an argument. She told Michael she'd changed her mind, that she didn't want to marry him, that she wanted to be with Richard instead. How do you know all this? Because I followed them. I'd overheard Richard and Patricia planning something earlier that day, and I was worried, so I followed them to the lake and hid in the trees nearby. You watched them kill Michael? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Michael was devastated. He couldn't believe what Patricia was saying. He started crying, begging her to reconsider. And then Richard came out of hiding. What did Richard do? He told Michael to leave, to forget about Patricia and the baby. Michael refused. He said the baby was his, that he had rights. That's when Richard attacked him. He attacked him? They fought. Michael was bigger, but Richard had the element of surprise. He pushed Michael toward the water. Michael lost his balance and fell in. He hit his head on a rock at the edge of the lake. I heard the crack from where I was hiding. I closed my eyes, imagining the scene. My biological father dying in the cold water while my mother and the man I'd called Dad watched. What happened next? Michael was unconscious, floating face down in the water. Patricia started to panic. She wanted to pull him out, to call for help, but Richard stopped her. He said it was too late, that Michael was already dead, that if they called for help, they'd both go to prison. So they just left him there? Richard held Patricia back while Michael drowned. It took maybe 2 minutes, the longest 2 minutes of my life. And then, when it was over, they got back in the car and drove away. And you did nothing? You just watched? I was terrified, Susan said, sobbing now. I was 23 years old, and I'd just watched my brothers and sister commit murder. I didn't know what to do. So I ran. I got in my car and I drove home, and I pretended I'd never been there. But someone else saw them, a fisherman named Tom Bradley. Susan looked surprised. I didn't know that. Richard and Patricia never mentioned anyone else there. He was out on the lake. He saw two people arguing and heard a splash. He tried to tell the police, but they didn't listen, and then Helen paid him to keep quiet. Helen knew? She must have. She paid Tom $10,000 2 days after Michael's death. Susan was quiet for a moment, processing this. That makes sense, actually. Helen suspected what happened. She confronted Patricia and Richard a few days after the funeral. I was there. She said she knew they'd killed Michael, that she'd figure out how to prove it. What did they say? Richard denied everything, but Helen didn't believe him. She said she was going to the police, that she'd make sure they both went to prison. But she never did. No, because a week later she was dead. Did Richard kill her too? Susan shook her head. I don't think so. I think Helen really did die of a heart attack. The stress of losing Michael, the suspicion about Patricia and Richard, the financial problems, it all caught up with her. Her heart just gave out. But the autopsy showed high levels of potassium. Helen had been taking potassium supplements for years. She had low potassium levels due to a medication she was on. The high levels in her system were probably just from her regular supplements. So Helen's death really was natural? Or at least probably natural. There was no way to know now. Susan, why are you telling me all this now? Why not 35 years ago? Because I was a coward. I was afraid of what would happen if I told the truth, afraid I'd lose my family, afraid I'd go to prison as an accessory, so I kept quiet. But when you started asking questions, when you saw me digging into the past, I realized I couldn't keep lying. You deserve to know the truth about your father, about what really happened to him. I need you to tell this to the police, to make an official statement. I will. I'm ready to face the consequences. And I need you to testify against Patricia and Richard. She nodded. I'll do whatever you need me to do. We sat there in silence for a few minutes, the weight of her confession hanging between us. Finally, I stood up. I need to go. I need to think about what to do next. Charlotte, I'm so sorry for everything. I know that doesn't change anything, but I am truly sorry. I didn't respond. I just walked back to my car and drove away.
I didn't go home. I couldn't face Marcus yet, couldn't tell him what I'd just learned. Instead, I drove to a hotel and checked in for the night. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. My mother and Richard, the man I'd called Dad my entire life, had murdered my biological father. They'd watched him drown and then built a life on that lie. Every memory I had of my childhood was tainted now. Every birthday party, every family dinner, every I love you, all of it was built on murder. I thought about confronting them, screaming at them, demanding to know how could they live with themselves. But what would that accomplish? They'd just deny it, or make excuses, or try to justify what they'd done. No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed evidence. I needed to build a case that would hold up in court. I called Marcus. Charlotte, where are you? I've been worried. I'm at a hotel. I'm okay. I needed some space. What happened? I told him everything Susan had told me. When I finished, there was a long silence. Jesus Christ, he finally said. Charlotte, you need to go to the police right now. I will, but first I need to talk to a lawyer. I need to understand what kind of case we have, what evidence we need. I can help with that. My firm has a criminal defense attorney who's really good. Let me call him, see if he can meet with you tomorrow. Thank you. Charlotte, are you sure you're okay? Do you want me to come to you? No, I'm okay. I just need tonight to process everything. I'll see you tomorrow. We hung up, and I lay back down, exhaustion finally overtaking me. I fell asleep, still fully clothed, my mind full of dark water and drowning men. The next morning, Marcus called to tell me he'd set up a meeting with a lawyer, a man named Albert Grayson. We met at his office at 10 a.m. Albert was in his 50s with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He listened carefully as I told him everything. The documents I'd found, David's account of the party, Tom Bradley's story, and Susan's confession. When he finished, he sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "This is a complex case," he said finally. "The murder happened 35 years ago, which presents some challenges, but it's not impossible." "What do we need to prove it?" "We need Susan to make an official statement to the police. We need Tom to do the same, and we need to establish motive, which, based on what you've told me about the inheritance, shouldn't be difficult." "What about the statute of limitations? Can they still be prosecuted after 35 years? "For murder? Yes, there's no statute of limitations on murder. If we can prove they did it, they can be charged and tried." "What are the chances of conviction?" "Honestly, it's hard to say. We have eyewitness testimony from Susan, but she's a family member, which makes her less credible in the eyes of a jury. We have Tom's testimony about seeing two people at the lake, but he can't identify them. We have circumstantial evidence, the inheritance, the timeline, the name change, but we don't have physical evidence. No murder weapon, no forensics, no DNA. "So you're saying we might not win?" "I'm saying it's going to be an uphill battle, but it's not impossible, especially if we can find more evidence." "Like what?" "Like financial records showing that Patricia and Richard benefited from Michael's death, like witnesses who can testify to their relationship, to their motive, like any documentation of their plan." "How do I find that?" "You investigate. You talk to people who knew them back then. You look through old records, old documents. You build a timeline and a narrative that makes sense. And then? And then we go to the police with everything we have. We file a complaint, we push for an investigation, and we hope that the district attorney decides there's enough evidence to bring charges." "How long will that take?" "Months, probably, maybe longer. These things don't happen quickly." I felt a wave of frustration. So they just get to keep living their lives while I do all this work to prove they're murderers? Unfortunately, yes, unless you want to confront them directly, which I would strongly advise against. "Why not?" "Because if they know you're building a case against them, they might destroy evidence, they might intimidate witnesses, they might even flee. It's better to keep your investigation quiet until you're ready to go to the police." I nodded, understanding the logic even though I hated it. "There's one more thing," Albert said. "The trust fund. You said your parents told you there's $6 million in a trust for you." "Yes." "We need to verify that. If they lied about the trust, if they spent that money, that's another crime. Theft, fraud, possibly embezzlement, depending on how the trust was structured." "Marcus is helping me look into that." "Good, because if we can prove financial crimes in addition to murder, it strengthens our case significantly." We talked for another hour, going over strategy and next steps. Albert agreed to represent me, and we set up a plan. I would continue investigating, gathering evidence and witness statements. Marcus would track down information about the trust, and Albert would prepare the legal documents we need to file a complaint with the police. When I left his office, I felt more focused. I had a plan, I had a goal, and I was going to see it through, no matter how long it took. Over the next 2 weeks, I became obsessed with the investigation. I took a full leave of absence from my teaching job, telling my principal I had a family emergency, which was true in a way. I started by tracking down everyone who'd been at the party the night Michael died. David Chen had given me a list of names, and I methodically contacted each person. Most of them didn't remember much. It had been 35 years, after all. But a few had useful information. A woman named Jennifer Park remembered seeing Patricia and Michael leave together. She said they looked upset, like they'd been arguing. A man named Chris Delgado remembered Helen Morrison showing up and demanding to talk to Michael. He said Helen looked angry, almost desperate. A woman named Amy Tran remembered Richard Morrison being at the party earlier in the evening, even though he hadn't been invited. She said he'd been watching Patricia and Michael all night with a strange expression on his face. It was creepy, Amy told me over the phone, like he was jealous or something. I remember thinking it was weird because they were siblings. Why would he be jealous of his brother's girlfriend? I thanked her and added her statement to my growing file of evidence. Meanwhile, Marcus was making progress on the trust fund investigation. He'd contacted several banks and investment firms, trying to find any record of a trust established in my name in 1989. After a week of searching, he finally found something. There is a trust, he told me over dinner one night. It was established in June 1989 by Richard Webb. That's the name your father was using after the name change. The initial deposit was $2.1 million. So they were telling the truth? About the trust existing, yes, but here's where it gets interesting. The trust has been accessed multiple times over the years. My stomach dropped. What do you mean, accessed? I mean money has been withdrawn, not all of it, but significant amounts. According to the records I was able to obtain, there have been withdrawals totaling about $3.2 million over the past 35 years. $3 million? But they said they never touched it. They lied. And here's the thing, the withdrawals were all legal. Richard set up the trust with himself as the trustee, which gave him the authority to make withdrawals for your benefit. He could claim the money was spent on your education, your health care, your living expenses. But it wasn't. I went to public school. I got scholarships for college. They never gave me any money beyond normal parental support. Exactly, which means they likely used that money for themselves, which is fraud. Can we prove it? We'd need to subpoena their financial records, see where the money actually went, but yes, I think we can prove it. This was huge. Not only had my parents murdered my biological father, but they'd also stolen millions of dollars that should have been mine. I called Albert Grayson and told him what Marcus had found. He was excited. This is exactly what we needed. Financial crimes are much easier to prove than a 35-year-old murder. We can use this as leverage. What do you mean? We go to the police with the fraud case first. We show them the evidence of the stolen money. Once they start investigating that, we introduce the murder allegations. It's a way to get law enforcement interested in the case. When can we do this? I need a few more days to prepare the documents, but soon, very soon. I hung up feeling a mix of excitement and dread. This was really happening. I was really going to turn in my own parents for murder and fraud. Part of me still couldn't believe it. Part of me wanted to give them a chance to explain, to tell their side of the story. But I remembered Michael drowning in that cold water while they watched. I remembered the 34 years of lies, and I knew I was doing the right thing. But before I went to the police, I needed to do one more thing. I needed to confront them, not to give them a chance to explain, I was past that, but to see their faces when they realized I knew everything, to take back some of the power they'd stolen from me. I called my mother. "Charlotte, sweetheart, where have you been? We've been so worried. You haven't returned any of our calls." "I need to talk to you and Dad, both of you, tonight." "Of course. Come over for dinner. I'll make your favorite." "No, not at your house. Somewhere public. The Riverside Restaurant, 7 p.m. There was a pause. "Charlotte, what's this about?" "You'll find out tonight. Will you be there?" Yes, of course, we'll be there."
I hung up before she could ask any more questions. Marcus wanted to come with me, but I told him I needed to do this alone. He made me promise to text him every 30 minutes so he'd know I was safe. I arrived at the restaurant at 6:45 p.m. It was a nice place, upscale but not pretentious, with large windows overlooking the river. I'd chosen it specifically because it was public, lots of witnesses if things went wrong. My parents arrived at exactly 7 p.m. My mother looked anxious, her hands twisting together nervously. Richard looked guarded, his jaw tight. They sat down across from me, and for a moment no one spoke. "Charlotte," my mother finally said, "what's going on? You've been avoiding us for weeks. We're worried about you." "Are you?" I asked calmly. "Are you really worried about me? Or are you worried about what I might have found out?" Richard's expression hardened. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out a folder, not the original documents, but copies I'd made. I slid it across the table. "I'm talking about these, the real birth certificate, the name change, the trust fund you've been stealing from for 35 years. My mother opened the folder with shaking hands. As she looked at the documents, her face went pale. "Charlotte, we can explain." "Can you? Can you explain why you murdered Michael Morrison and then spent the next 35 years lying about it?" The color drained from Richard's face. "What? Charlotte, that's insane. We didn't—" "I have a witness, someone who was there that night, someone who saw you push Michael into the water and watched him drown." My mother started crying. "Charlotte, please, you don't understand." "Then make me understand. Tell me why you killed my father." "He wasn't your father," Richard said sharply. "I'm your father. I raised you. I was there for every moment of your life." "You're not my father. You're my uncle, and you're a murderer." The people at the nearby tables were starting to stare. The waiter approached, looking concerned, but I waved him away. "Charlotte, please lower your voice," my mother begged. "Let us explain. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. It was an accident." "An accident? You planned it. You lured Michael to the lake and you killed him for his inheritance money." "No," my mother said desperately. "That's not what happened. Yes, we went to the lake. Yes, we argued. But Michael's death was an accident. Richard pushed him, but he didn't mean to kill him. He hit his head. It happened so fast." "And then you watched him drown. You could have saved him, but you didn't." "We panicked," Richard said, his voice low. "We were young and stupid, and we panicked. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late." "It took 2 minutes for him to drown. You had 2 minutes to save him, but you chose not to." My mother was sobbing now, her makeup running down her face. "We've regretted it every day since, every single day, but all we could do was try to give you the best life possible." "With stolen money, money that was supposed to be mine." "We used that money for you," Richard insisted, "for your education, your health care." "Liar! I've seen the records. You withdrew over $3 million, and almost none of it went to me. You spent it on yourselves, on this life you built on my father's grave." "Charlotte, please." My mother reached across the table, trying to take my hand. I pulled away. "Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again." "We love you," she whispered. "Everything we did because we love you." "You don't know what love is. Love doesn't murder. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't steal." I stood up, gathering my folder. "I'm going to the police tomorrow. I'm going to tell them everything. And I'm going to make you both pay for what you did." "Charlotte, wait." Richard started to stand. "Don't follow me. Don't call me. Don't try to contact me in any way. The next time you see me, it will be in court." I walked out of the restaurant, my whole body shaking. I got to my car and sat there for a moment, trying to calm down. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "You okay?" I texted back. "I'm okay. On my way home." As I drove back to the city, I felt a strange sense of relief. I'd done it. I'd confronted them. I'd taken back my power. Now it was time to make them face justice.
The next morning, Albert Grayson and I went to the police station. We met with Detective Sarah Chen, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Albert presented our evidence, the financial records showing the fraudulent withdrawals from the trust, Susan's written statement about witnessing the murder, Tom Bradley's statement about finding the body and being paid off by Helen, and the testimonies from the party guests. Detective Chen listened carefully, taking notes. When we finished, she sat back in her chair. "This is a serious allegation," she said. "Murder, fraud, conspiracy. If what you're saying is true, we're talking about multiple felonies." "It is true," I said firmly. "I have witnesses, I have documentation, I have everything you need." "The problem is the murder happened 35 years ago. Physical evidence is long gone. We'd be relying entirely on witness testimony and circumstantial evidence." "But you can still investigate, right?" Albert asked. "You can still bring charges." "We can investigate. Whether the DA decides to bring charges will depend on what we find." She looked at me. "Ms. Webb, I need to be honest with you. Cases like this are difficult. Even with witnesses, even with motive, it's hard to get a conviction after so much time has passed." "But you'll try." "We'll investigate thoroughly. I promise you that." She assigned 2 other detectives to the case, and they began their work immediately. They interviewed Susan, who gave a detailed account of what she'd witnessed that night. They interviewed Tom Bradley, who confirmed his story about seeing 2 people at the lake and being paid off by Helen to keep quiet. They interviewed the party guests, building a timeline of that night. They subpoenaed Richard and Patricia's financial records, tracing where the trust fund money had gone, and they brought Richard and Patricia in for questioning. I wasn't allowed to be present for the interrogation, but Albert was there as an observer. He called me afterward to tell me what happened. "They lawyered up immediately," he said, "refused to answer any questions without their attorney present." "What does that mean for the case?" "It means they're taking this seriously, which is good in a way. It shows they're worried, but it also means this is going to be a fight." Over the next month, the investigation continued. The detectives were thorough, interviewing everyone who'd known Michael, Patricia, and Richard back in 1989. They dug through old records, old photographs, old newspaper articles, and slowly a picture emerged. Multiple people confirmed that Richard had been obsessed with Patricia, that their relationship had seemed inappropriate even before anyone knew they were involved romantically. Several people remembered Richard's jealousy when Patricia started dating Michael. The financial records showed that Richard and Patricia had used the trust fund money to buy their house, to take expensive vacations, to fund a lifestyle they couldn't have afforded on their own salaries. And most damning of all, the detectives found something I hadn't known about: a life insurance policy. Michael had taken out a life insurance policy 6 months before he died, naming Patricia as the beneficiary. The payout was $500,000, a significant amount in 1989. Patricia collected that money 2 months after Michael's death. When Albert told me about the insurance policy, I felt sick. So they killed him for the inheritance and the insurance money? It looks that way. And here's the thing, the insurance company did investigate at the time. They were suspicious about the timing, but ultimately they paid out because the death was ruled accidental. Can we use this? Absolutely. It establishes financial motive. Combined with everything else, it's building a strong case. 6 weeks after I first went to the police, Detective Chen called me. "Ms. Webb, I wanted to let you know that we're recommending charges. The DA has agreed to move forward with prosecution." My heart started racing. "What charges?" "For Richard Webb, second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and embezzlement. For Patricia Webb, second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and embezzlement." "When will they be arrested?" "Tomorrow morning. We're executing arrest warrants at 6 a.m.
I thanked her and hung up, then immediately called Marcus. They're arresting them tomorrow. It's really happening. How do you feel? I don't know. Relieved? Terrified? Guilty? Guilty, Charlotte. You have nothing to feel guilty about. They're still my parents, the people who raised me. Part of me still loves them, even after everything. That's normal. That's human, but it doesn't change what they did. I know. I wish things were different. I know, baby. I know. The next morning, I woke up early, unable to sleep. I kept imagining the police showing up at my parents' house, putting them in handcuffs, reading them their rights. At 7 a.m., Detective Chen called. They're in custody, both of them. They'll be arraigned this afternoon. Thank you for letting me know. Ms. Webb, I should warn you, this is going to be a media circus, a 35-year-old murder case, incest, stolen inheritance money. The press is going to be all over this. She was right. By noon, the story was everywhere. Local news, national news, social media. Headlines screamed, "Teacher discovers parents are sibling murderers. 35-year-old cold case solved by victim's daughter. Incest, murder, and millions. The Morrison family scandal." My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, distant relatives, former students, random strangers. Everyone wanted to talk to me to get my side of the story. I turned off my phone and stayed in my apartment with Marcus, hiding from the world. The arraignment was that afternoon. Albert attended and called me afterward. They both pled not guilty. Bail was set at $1 million each. Will they make bail? I don't know. They'd need to put up their house as collateral, and even then they'd need to come up with 10% in cash. That's $100,000 each. As it turned out, they couldn't make bail. They remained in custody awaiting trial. The trial was set for 6 months later. Those 6 months were the longest of my life. I tried to go back to work to resume some semblance of normalcy, but it was impossible. Everyone knew who I was now. My students looked at me with a mixture of pity and fascination. My colleagues didn't know how to talk to me. I ended up taking a full year's leave of absence. Marcus and I considered moving away, starting fresh somewhere new. But I couldn't leave. Not until this was finished. Not until I saw justice served. The trial began on a cold Monday in November. The courthouse was packed with reporters, spectators, and curious onlookers. I sat in the front row with Marcus on one side and Albert on the other. My parents were let in wearing orange jumpsuits, their hands cuffed. My mother looked like she'd aged 10 years in 6 months. Her hair was gray now, her face gaunt. Richard looked hardened, his jaw set in a permanent scowl. They didn't look at me. The prosecution's case was strong. They called Susan to the stand first. She testified about what she'd seen that night at the lake, her voice shaking but clear. She described watching Richard push Michael, watching him fall and hit his head, watching him drown while Patricia and Richard did nothing. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she was lying to protect herself, that she might have been the one who killed Michael. But Susan held firm. "I know what I saw," she said. "I've lived with the guilt of staying silent for 35 years. I'm not going to lie anymore." Next, Tom Bradley testified. He described finding Michael's body, seeing the 2 people at the lake, being paid by Helen to keep quiet. Then came the party guests, each one adding a piece to the puzzle. Jennifer Park testified about seeing Patricia and Michael leave together, looking upset. Amy Tran testified about seeing Richard at the party, watching Patricia with jealous eyes. The financial expert testified about the trust fund, showing exactly how much money had been withdrawn and where it had gone. Vacations, home improvements, luxury purchases, none of it spent on me. The insurance investigator testified about the life insurance policy and the suspicious timing of Michael's death. And finally, I testified. I told the jury about finding the documents in the basement, about discovering the truth about my parentage, about the investigation I'd conducted. I told them about confronting my parents at the restaurant, about their admission that Michael's death wasn't an accident. The defense attorney cross-examined me aggressively, trying to suggest I was motivated by greed, that I was making up the murder allegations to get access to the trust fund money. Isn't it true, Ms. Webb, that you only started this investigation after you found out about the inheritance? No, I said firmly. I started this investigation after I found out my parents had been lying to me my entire life. The money was never the point. But you stand to inherit millions if your parents are convicted, don't you? I stand to inherit what was always rightfully mine, what they stole from me. So you do care about the money. I care about the truth. I care about justice for my father. Michael Morrison deserves justice, and I'm going to make sure he gets it. The defense's case was weak. They tried to argue that Michael's death was an accident, that Richard had pushed him in self-defense during an argument, that they'd panicked and made bad decisions but hadn't committed murder. They called character witnesses who testified about what good parents Richard and Patricia had been, how much they'd loved me, how devoted they'd been to my upbringing. But it wasn't enough to overcome the mountain of evidence against them. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back with a verdict, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. On the count of second-degree murder, how do you find the defendant, Richard Webb? Guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find the defendant, Richard Webb? Guilty. On the count of fraud, how do you find the defendant, Richard Webb? Guilty. On the count of embezzlement, how do you find the defendant, Richard Webb? Guilty. They went through the same questions for Patricia. Guilty on all counts. My mother collapsed, sobbing. Richard just stared straight ahead, his face expressionless. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later.
The sentencing hearing was shorter than the trial, but no less emotional. The judge allowed me to give a victim impact statement. I stood at the podium, looking at the 2 people who'd raised me, and spoke from my heart. For 34 years, I believed I knew who I was. I believed I had a normal family, a normal life, but it was all a lie. Every birthday, every holiday, every moment of my childhood was built on murder and deception. You took my father from me before I ever had a chance to know him. You stole millions of dollars that should have been mine. You lied to me every single day of my life. But worse than all of that, you made me doubt myself. When I found out the truth, I felt like I was broken, like there was something wrong with me because of how I was conceived. I felt ashamed of my own existence. It took me months to realize that I'm not responsible for your choices. I'm not defined by your sins. I am my own person, and I deserve better than what you gave me. Michael Morrison deserved better too. He deserved to live, to raise his daughter, to have a future. You took that from him. You took it from both of us. It's been 2 years since the trial. 2 years since my life was turned upside down and inside out. The media frenzy eventually died down. I'm no longer recognized everywhere I go. I can walk down the street without people staring and whispering. I went back to teaching, but at a different school, in a different city. Marcus and I moved to Portland, where no one knows our story. We bought a small house with a garden, and we're talking about starting a family. The trust fund money was returned to me, along with the restitution from my parents' assets. After legal fees and taxes, I ended up with about $5.8 million. It's more money than I ever imagined having. I used some of it to pay off our debts and buy our house. I donated $1 million to organizations that support victims of family violence and incest survivors. And I set up a scholarship fund in Michael Morrison's name for students pursuing careers in science and education. The rest is invested, growing quietly, waiting for whatever the future brings. I haven't spoken to my parents since the sentencing. They've written me letters from prison, dozens of them. I haven't opened any of them. Maybe someday I will, but not yet. Susan and I have developed a relationship. It's complicated and sometimes painful, but we're working on it. She's in therapy, dealing with the guilt of staying silent for so long. I'm in therapy too, working through the trauma of everything I've learned. We have dinner once a month. We talk about Michael, about what he was like, about the father I never got to know. She tells me stories about him, his laugh, his dreams, his kindness. It helps in a way. It makes him real to me. I found Michael's grave last year. It's in a small cemetery about an hour from where I grew up. The headstone is simple. Michael James Morrison, 1967 to 1989, beloved son and brother. I had it changed. Now it reads, Michael James Morrison, 1967 to 1989, beloved son, brother, and father. I visit sometimes when I'm in the area. I bring flowers. I tell him about my life, about the justice I fought for, about the daughter he never got to meet. I like to think he'd be proud of me. Marcus and I got married last month, a small ceremony, just close friends, no family. It was perfect. We're talking about having a baby. I'm terrified, honestly, terrified of passing on some genetic curse, some taint from my parents' sins. But my therapist reminds me that I'm not my parents, that I get to choose who I am and how I love. So we're going to try. We're going to build a family based on truth and honesty and real love. The kind of love that doesn't murder or lie or steal. The kind of love I never had growing up, but that I'm determined to give to my own children. I'm sitting in my backyard, watching my daughter Emma play in the sandbox. She's 18 months old, with Michael's eyes and my smile. She's perfect. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. I had genetic testing done, worried about the implications of my parents being siblings. The doctors assured me that the risk was minimal. Richard wasn't actually my biological father, so there was no increased risk of genetic disorders. Emma is healthy and happy and completely unaware of the complicated history she's inherited. I think about my parents sometimes. They're still in prison. They'll be eligible for parole in 23 years when they're in their 80s. I doubt they'll ever get out. My mother still writes to me. I've started reading her letters, though I don't respond. She talks about her regrets, about how much she misses me, about how sorry she is. She asks about Emma, begs for photos, pleads for forgiveness. I'm not ready to forgive. Maybe I never will be, but I'm learning to let go of the anger, to accept that what happened, happened, and I can't change it. Richard doesn't write. I don't know if that's because he has nothing to say or because he knows I wouldn't read his letters anyway. Susan is a part of Emma's life. She's Aunt Susan, the woman who tells stories about Grandpa Michael. Emma loves her, and I'm glad. Every child deserves family, and Susan is trying to be the family member she should have been 35 years ago. I wrote a book about my experience. It was therapeutic, getting it all out on paper. It became a bestseller, which was unexpected. I've done interviews, spoken at conferences, become an advocate for truth and justice in family systems. People ask me if I regret investigating, if I wished I'd just left the past buried. The answer is always no. The truth is painful, but it's better than living a lie. I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about honesty, respect, and genuine love. Marcus is my family. Emma is my family. Susan, in her imperfect way, is my family. And Michael, the father I never knew, he's my family too. His memory, his legacy, the justice I fought for in his name, that's family. I've also learned that you can't control where you come from, but you can control where you go. My parents made terrible choices. They committed terrible crimes. But those are their choices, their crimes, not mine. I am Charlotte Webb. I am a teacher, a wife, a mother. I am the daughter of Michael Morrison, a man who deserved better than what he got. I am a survivor of family trauma and a fighter for truth and justice. And I am not defined by the circumstances of my birth. I am defined by the choices I make, the love I give, and the life I build. Emma toddles over to me, her hands full of sand, her face lit up with joy. "Mama, look!" I scoop her up, kissing her sandy cheeks. "I see, baby. That's beautiful." She giggles and squirms to get down, running back to her sandbox. I watch her play, this perfect little person who exists because of a complicated, painful history. But she doesn't have to carry that history. I'll tell her the truth when she's old enough to understand. I'll tell her about her grandfather Michael, about the fight for justice, about the importance of truth. But I'll also tell her that she gets to write her own story, that she's not bound by the past, that she can be whoever she wants to be. Because that's what I've learned in the end. We all get to write our own stories. And mine, despite everything, is turning out pretty good. 3 months ago, I got a call from the prison. My mother had collapsed during recreation time. She'd had a massive stroke. She was in the hospital and the doctors didn't think she'd make it. They asked if I wanted to come say goodbye. I sat with that question for 3 hours. Marcus told me he'd support whatever I decided. Susan said I should go, that I'd regret it if I didn't. In the end, I went. I walked into that hospital room and saw the woman who'd raised me, who'd lied to me, who'd murdered my father. She looked so small in that bed, hooked up to machines, her face slack on one side. She couldn't speak, but her eyes were open. She saw me. I sat down next to her bed. I didn't hold her hand. I didn't cry. I just sat there. "I'm here," I said finally. "I don't know why. I don't know if it's for you or for me, but I'm here." She made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp. "I can't forgive you," I continued. "I don't know if I ever will. What you did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that I'm okay. I have a good life. I have a daughter. Her name is Emma, and she's beautiful." Tears rolled down my mother's face. "I'm going to tell Emma about you someday. I'm going to tell her the truth, all of it, the good and the bad, and I'm going to let her decide how she feels about it." I stood up to leave. "Goodbye, Mom." She died 3 hours later. I didn't go to the funeral. Richard was allowed to attend under guard, but I stayed home with Emma and Marcus. Susan went. She said it was small, just her and a few people from the prison ministry. She said Richard cried. I felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just a strange emptiness. It's been 3 months since then, and I'm still processing it. My therapist says grief is complicated when the person you're grieving hurt you so deeply, that it's okay to feel conflicted, to feel nothing, to feel everything all at once. I'm working on it. Richard is still in prison. He'll die there most likely. I have no plans to see him. But I kept one of my mother's letters, the last one she sent before the stroke. I finally read it last week. It said, "Charlotte, I know you may never read this. I know you may never forgive me, but I need you to know that loving you was the only thing I ever did right. You were the light in all our darkness. You were the good that came from all our mistakes. I'm sorry I couldn't be the mother you deserved. I'm sorry for everything, but I'm not sorry you exist.
You are the best thing I ever had a part in creating. I love you. I will always love you. Even if you hate me forever, I will love you. Mom. I cried when I read it, not because it changed anything, not because it made what she did okay, but because it was true. Despite everything, she did love me. In her broken, twisted way, she loved me. And maybe that's the most complicated truth of all. Love isn't always good. Love isn't always healthy. Love can coexist with terrible things. But real love, the kind I'm trying to build with Marcus and Emma, that's different. That's love with boundaries and honesty and respect. That's the kind of love I'm teaching Emma. That's the kind of love that heals. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I know it's dark, I know it's complicated, but it's my truth, and I'm no longer afraid to tell it. If you're dealing with family secrets, with trauma, with the weight of things you never asked to carry, know that you're not alone. Know that the truth, as painful as it is better than living a lie. Know that you get to decide who you are, not your parents, not your past, not the circumstances of your birth. You get to write your own story. And that's the most powerful thing in the world. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If this story resonated with you, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Your support means everything to me. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect, Charlotte.